So in this video, I thought I'd do a cinematography breakdown of Woodsmith, which is a very low budget short that I shot last summer. I actually think as a film it comes together really nicely with some great performances all round and a really interesting premise. With my work, however, I would basically change everything, which is why I thought it would be a good example for this. So I can't show the full film as it hasn't been released yet, but I can show some stills and kind of talk through them. So this one first from near the beginning of the film. The dining room table setup is a classic one you get asked for a lot, and I think my one here is a great example of something that was almost pretty good, but let down in a couple of key ways. So first of all, lighting from outside the windows, always a great shout, and I got that bit right. We have this 2.5K HMI blasting through that window to supplement the natural light. Blasting is the operative word though, as whilst I got the placement of the exterior light right, the light is just bouncing everywhere and just washing over everything. With cinematography, it's fundamentally about contrast, light and shadow, and what I've done is kind of just bathe everything in light, meaning nothing is really highlighted and it just becomes flat and washed out. So now I'll show an example from Patrick on the Wandering DP on what I should have done. You see how he's shown a little bit of the window in order to motivate the light that he's adding, but he's also added the classic curtains and shears so he can really fine tune the direction and placement of the light just by opening and closing the curtains. You see how it slashes against the back wall, kind of adding a little pocket of harsh light, which then works perfectly for lifting our character off of the background, and we have layers of dark light, and that's depth, which fundamentally is what we're after. Placement is another thing I kind of messed up on. You see how in Patrick's example, we look along the table, creating this leading line towards our characters and kind of focusing our attentions inwards. Whereas in mine, we're too far round to one side and we're not really utilising the length of the table to add depth. I remember now I ended up just going with this composition as the room was quite small and I couldn't move the table much as they wouldn't have been able to get around it in the other scenes that are set at the table. But that is just, it's the wrong way to go about setting up a shop. And that brings me on to my next learning. No one cares at all about the continuity of the placement of a table. Just move it to where it looks best for each shot. Obviously, if it jumps from one side of the room to the other, we will notice that. But if it's the 30 centimeters here and there, no one will notice or care. So I should have just pulled the table out and positioned it at a better angle, giving more space behind them to add some depth, as well as the curtains. Negative fill would have also massively helped here too. I didn't know that, but it's just we were filming, I think, the whole thing in a day and a half with a 5-person crew, so we had to move very, very quickly. If I could have my time again, I'd have just blacked the ceiling with just bin bags or something and brought in my 8x8 neg, just held between two stands and had it right behind the camera, with then just a couple of Titan tubes on a polecat or a boom arm or something that could have just lit their faces from the other side but still be motivated by the light from the window. So in this next scene, I think I did quite a bit better. It was actually nighttime, so we didn't have any ambient, so it didn't matter as much that we didn't have time to set up and move the neg for each shot. We've got my Nanlux 500 something lighting her through a light dome with the 2 included layers of diffusion and the grid and then another layer of diffusion. It's motivated by the lamp behind her, and I think it works pretty well. Ideally, the bulbs would have been replaced by aperture bulbs, so we could set the exact level. As you can see, they are a bit hot, and the level of the key light probably should have come down a few points too to make it more believable that is light from the lamp. Next time, I think I'd just do a basic cove setup with the Nanlux bouncing off a sheet of unbleached muslin, as I think it does look a little bit lit, which is just the nature of using a light dome because it's very focused. A practical on in the room behind her would have added another very easy layer of depth too, so I'm annoyed I didn't think of that. And I probably should have moved him forward a bit as they seem a bit distant. And then just lastly, a Titan tube overhead could have created just this nice rim light around his face and just added another layer of depth. And if that lamp is supposedly lighting her up that much, then we should probably see some of it on his face too. I think same really in the close-up. The light in the room behind would have been particularly good for this shot as it's just quite flat behind her. I think a slightly more front-on angle would have been better as it feels a bit disconnected from her eye line, more like we're a separate person in the room rather than being part of this very intimate conversation that they're having. Next up, we have a masterclass in how not to do the most important part of filming exteriors, scheduling. I will give myself a little bit of leeway as we shot the whole thing in like a day and a half, so we just had to shoot each scene whenever we had the actors. But harsh midday sun was not the time to do these exterior shots, especially as we had to be looking in this specific direction in order to set up the next shot where the brother goes to the shed and discovers some stuff. So everything is just front lit and flat. The trees were my attempt to add some depth, but compositionally, I just don't think it really works as the focus is on the trees. And although I think a longer lens and kind of a camera move, panning and tilting with the car as it comes in, would have helped a lot and just made it all feel much less flat. So in this next scene, I feel like it's definitely better. This is a kind of a pivotal moment with quite a serious and nasty discovery, so the harshness of the key light is spot on, I think, to show someone who's just had their whole world turned upside down. Only things, some sheer curtains on the window in the background would have just brought the ambient level down behind him, creating more contrast and picking him off the background, as it does all just sort of get a bit muddy behind him. There is a nice backlight coming through too, so I wish I just added like another small lamp just to kind of exaggerate that. I wish I'd also just moved the table way out. It's impossible to tell exactly where that table is within the room, so no one at all would have noticed if I'd pulled him and the table away from the wall just to add a little bit more space and depth between him and the background. I think I shot the whole film at a T5.6, as I didn't want it to look pretty. I hate saying what my references were, as it kind of just shows how far my work is from what I was after, but No Country for Old Men was kind of a key reference, and Deakins uses some fairly deep stops in that, but whilst I think that worked great for some other shots, a lower stop would have definitely worked a bit better here, just to add more of that separation between subject and background. I do like the foreground detail of the table though. I think it kind of, the frame within a frame thing I think works quite well. This one I think is actually pretty good. A production designer would have come in handy, as we didn't have one, just to sort of dress the kitchen a little bit, as the scissors just feel a bit weirdly placed there. But other than that, I think I'm fairly happy with this scene. Next one. I think this version of the dining room scene works a lot better. I called the light way down to suit the tone of the scene, and I actually really like the hardness of the light on Harley, the seated character's face. One thing though, if we'd had a costume designer, I definitely would have asked to not have a white t-shirt or jacket. It's essentially just acting as a massive bounce now, and that whole area is just way too hot and quite distracting. Curtains and shears again, when he just limited the spill on the background and brought the room ambient way down. I wish I'd also put another light behind Harley in the little hallway behind him, motivated by one of the windows in the rooms, just to sort of light up Chris, the other character, because his face is kind of getting a bit lost. Although I think the main thing that lets this scene down is the lack of foreground detail. We just sort of plonked in the middle of the room and it kind of makes it feel a bit fake. But if we were shooting through a door frame, or if there was some furniture in the edges of frame, coffee table, the arm of an armchair, it would have just made it a lot more three-dimensional. Then lastly, I just wanted to talk about not so much the shots, but more of a workflow thing. So for this film, Matty, who played Chris, was also the writer, the director, and the editor. So it's very much his film. And as part of the editing, he was also doing the grade, which is where I think I learned an important lesson. You need to have a conversation about the grade early in the production process and decide who gets the final say on the grade. Or ideally, that you won't finalise it until you and the director are both happy with it. This was kind of, basically naivety on my part, as I tend to create a LUT for the project before shooting and then use that on my monitor while we're filming. So I kind of just assumed this would be the look of the film, after some tweaking obviously. It's not to say I don't like the grade that Matty did, or that he's wrong and I'm right, but it's not the look I was intending on, and I think it's important to have those conversations before everything's all done. It is your work, and you want it to be presented in the way that you intended. So in summary, everything I learned. Curtains and shears to control room ambient when lighting from outside. If light just goes everywhere, then it's really nowhere, as everything is just the same level. Don't worry about furniture geography, just move things around so that each shot looks its best and no one will ever notice. Production design and costume design will make the biggest impact on your work, so make sure you have those people on the project and share as much as you can about your plans with them. And then try and veto bright white t-shirts.